Kevin, it is such a pleasure to have a chance to talk to you today. You are a very highly regarded reviewer and writer and expert on all things film. I'd like to start at the beginning. Where were you born and where'd you grow up?
I'm a native Angelino. First of all, I'm very flattered to be asked to be interviewed in the first place. That's, I think, an honor. No, I was born in Good Samaritan, downtown LA. I'm an inner city youth. I'm a fourth generation California newspaper man, a second generation Times man. My father and I together gave 69 years of continuous service to the paper. We overlapped a little bit. And I continue reviewing movies on a regular basis, even though I formally retired at the end of 2005.
What area did your father work in? What sort of
display advertising. He founded a division called, or a department, called ad service. Now, in the age of euphemism, they've changed it to creative graphics. This was in the late 40s, maybe 60 years ago. He figured that there should be an in-house little agency for the small advertiser with a staff of copywriters and artists who could generate ads for the small advertiser. And it's been very successful. It's still going 60 years later.
So did you grow up in and near downtown Los Angeles?
Yes.
Was that your home? What was that like back then when you were growing up? What was the atmosphere?
Wonderful. LA in the 40s and into the 50s, you know, I look back and I realize how much we took for granted. It was virtually a city without slums. The strength of the city was it had a very healthy middle class. So people could live in modest homes or apartments that were really beautifully kept. And there was no graffiti, there was no junk. It was a really idyllic time. I mean, if you happen to be Caucasian. I mean, there was absolute segregation, of course. I mean, it was legally enforced in my childhood. One of my earliest memories was being taken by the hand by my grandmother, and we got on the Vermont car, and then we transferred to the Pico car, a wonderful streamlined Modern.
Now, was that part of the red car line, or
no,
was
the
that
yellow
something
car.
different? This is the yellow car.
LA Transit.
Okay.
Which was actually much more comprehensive than the red cars. The red cars are famous. They went to distant designations, and they, you know, really great stretches. But for short commuting or even longer, but the interstices were the LA Transit, the yellow cars, as they're sometimes called. We got off at First and Spring, right by the Times building, which was the beginning of Little Tokyo. My grandmother went over there, and we went into a jewelry store, which was absolute pandemonium. It was like white sale end of month something in the basement of May Companies or something. It was absolutely frantic, and my grandmother came away with the most spectacular set of jade jewelry I've ever seen in my life. And I'm sure she paid next to nothing of it, because these people had like 48 hours or so to clear out before they were sent off to the internment cabs. And, you know, that really has made an impression on me over the years. The Japanese American kids were the elite. They were, you know, like 90% of the honor society. And I remember one day, one of our teachers asked us to write some sort of a personal essay. And this pretty little girl came up and read her, and she gave a very unpitying, matter-of-fact account of what it was like to spend 3 or 4 years in the concentration camps. These kids had been out of the camps for about 3 years, people my age.
Yes.
And I never recovered from that. It gave me a perspective that was just, really, it was unforgettable.
And you still think about it from
Oh
time
yes,
to time
all the time.
as
Yeah,
your life proceeds.
but yes, it's always in the back of my mind.
Interesting. What kind of people were your parents? What were they like?
This is a difficult subject. My father was a Terman child. He grew up in Palo Alto, and Louis Terman was devising the Stanford Binet IQ test. And I think my father was one of that original group of kids, But he was either, most theory today is that he was not born deaf, but that he got some kind of undetected, very drastic infection. And he was very, very deaf. And he did not handle this well. And some setbacks professionally and middle age. And I mean, he became a really nasty drunk. What can I say?
Sure. Not unique. Not a unique phenomena. It does happen.
It's sadly been out.
Yeah.
And he probably was the most brilliant, anti-intellectual, unsomatic person I ever had to deal with. And my mother was very passive, possessive. She had a very dominating mother that she worshipped, and my grandmother was the shaping influence, there's no question, for better or for worse. I credit her with a lot of my imagination, there's no, but it was damaging in a number of ways.
Well, in that household, what were you like? What kind of child were you growing up? And how did you respond?
Obedient. I was a very good little boy.
So you were responsible and...
I was told, every once in a while I'd have some kind of temper thing, but very rarely. And I was a zealous student all my life. I've always been what's the term? You just can't help but work all the time. I'm a workaholic. I'm a lifelong workaholic. I was a very good student, always a good student, I look back on my childhood more, but I've had more time to think about it in the last years where I am not working full time, and I realize I really knew I was different from the time I was 4 or 5, but I never really gave it any thought. Until afterwards, I sort of thought, well, puberty hit, and then I discovered I was gay, Well, now I realize, that, we're always gay, and if we're gay, we're always gay, and I really, I think about kindergarten, I'd rather play in the sandbox with the girls than sports, even,
Sure.
There's just those sensibilities. And I did not have the happiest of childhoods. However, I was blessed with wonderful extended family. I had tremendous aunts and uncles and cousins, and family friends, and relatives by the bushel. And I was the eldest grandchild, and I got a lot of attention. And this was very, very compensating. And so therefore, I think with so many of us, that if you look back and you take in the whole picture, it's a bittersweet thing. You may have had some really painful stuff, and I had some really painful stuff. but you really appreciate all the really good stuff because there were a number of really loving, caring people in the larger picture. And I mean,
Yes.
and by the time I was somewhere between 9 and 11 or so, my mother's sister-in-law took a sincere, lifelong interest in me. And I can tell you, I would not be honored by even being thought of to be qualified to be sitting here today if it weren't for her. I mean, she really was there. And she told me such important things that, like, you know, maybe a lot of bad stuff has happened and so had some lousy things done to you by your father and so on. At one point, it doesn't matter. You grow up and you must take responsibility for
Yes.
yourself, no matter what's happened for you. And you must get out there and you must earn a living and be able to take care of yourself in this world. And while you're at it, try to find out what you would really like to do with your life. Now, the right person saying those words, as timeless and simple as they are, can make a profound difference in a person's life. And I know too many people who never heard those words or never heard them at a time when it could actually affect the whole direction of their lives.
What a gift she gave.
Absolutely. She died in 2005, just before her 97th birthday.
Wow. And film. Did you go to films
Yeah.
as a child?
No, we got that was the whole thing. Is I do think, you know, film is the great escape. In the 40s, I was 4 in 1940, and so I was 14 in 1950. So the movies were at their height. There was theaters all over the place, easily accessible. The studios were booming. We went to, you know, American families, especially during the war, we went to the movies once a week or so. My parents were not big movie buffs, but that was a habit, like you watch TV now.
That's what people did in those
That's what
days.
people. That's right.
And
That's what
people
do.
used to go once a week, twice a week, regularly.
It wasn't really all that expensive. And of course, you have beautiful movie palaces. They're lovely. Even neighborhood theaters could be quite elegant. Not all of them, but many, you know. But the turning point for me was I was at Brendo Junior High, and I had a drama teacher. She was one of those really inspiring teachers. Cicely Schneidman, I owe you everything wherever you are. And she just was she was young and full of enthusiasm and passion. And she had, she gave us assignment to collect reviews in a scrapbook and then turn it in. Well, I had never read reviews.
Collect movie reviews.
No, I didn't, you know, I was, 12 or 13. It just
Sure.
never occurred to me, you know. Now, of course, we subscribed the Times since my father had been working for them since early 1937, and this was like 1949 or 50, something around there. And so I started reading them, the reviews, and it's the classic, you know, light bulb lights up. I said, my God, people can get paid to go to the movies and write up what they think about it? Oh my God, you know. And, you know, I carefully glued them all in, beautiful, and I put a Mondrian style cover on this. It was all very, now I realize I was emulating Mondrian. I wouldn't have known who Mondrian was
Sure.
at that point, but it was, I must have seen some Mondrian images. There were cubes of colors and things like that. And she was so impressed by my labor of love. She said, "Oh, may I keep this?" And I said, "Well, sure." But I thought it was such an impossible dream and not, so I thought I was going to be a college professor because I was an English lit major, and what can you do with an English lit major but
Right.
teach, right?
Where'd you go to college?
I went to Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania because I wanted to get away from home. And my mother's family had attended for several generations there.
Okay.
And my mother had even lived in Gettysburg for 2 years. And she talked about it. It was such aura of happiness. And it may have been the smartest thing I ever did.
When you were at college, did you have gay friends, or did you just sort of
No.
leave that
No.
as a separate part of your life?
I was there between 54 and 58. As I've said to people, there was no context really to come out to. One or two of my friends I confided in.
What happened after that? Where'd you
Well, I went to Penn State for graduate school, and,
Okay.
and I
in English
yeah,
literature?
I hated it, and that's when I had my first experience, which was really bad in a way because my friend was the aggressor, and he grew up in a tight, conservative, Sephardic Jewish community in Highland Park, New Jersey, which is adjacent to New Brunswick.
Yes, I know the area.
And he just was so tormented with guilt. I mean, I had some guilt, but nothing. I didn't have this heavy cloak of religion. But see, this was good because it made, in my generation, psychologists, even enlightened psychologists and sophisticated ones, there was a great deal of thought out there that many, quote, normal people go through a homosexual phase. It's maybe part of adolescence. It's just, So, I mean, I'm of that generation where maybe it's a phase. They don't
Sure.
bother so much with that anymore, I don't think. But when I got there, I really realized I had to face up that this was no phase.
Right.
And that
This was you.
this was me. I think there's a profound relationship between coming to terms with who you are and what you want to do with your life. I think they're very closely linked. And so I did not go on to my doctorate at Johns Hopkins as I had planned. And I had about a year in the wilderness, and I tried to get work in San Francisco and stay with my aunt and uncle in Marin County. That didn't work. I had to come home. Not a happy thing. My father did this, and I got to give him full credit for that. He got me a temporary job at the Times, and I just worked my way up. And when I finally got to be a copy boy, and I got an interview with the managing editor, it was really sort of unrehearsed. I just blurted out. I said, "I want to be a movie critic more than anything else." He said, "Well, my wife and I were just at the theater the other night, and Jeffrey, whatever his name was, he told the stringer in the entertainment section who covered theater and film and everything, he said he's going to go back to law. He's going to law school this fall. Do you want me to talk to Mr. Schur, who was both the drama critic and film critic, both."
And Kevin, what year was this that you were there?
This was
in
in
the 60s?
60, early, this is 62.
Okay.
And I said, yes. And he talked to Phil. Phil gave me a test review. Manchurian Candidate, the Frankenheimer. And he said,
Well, that's a good one to start.
he said, if you can write a good review on this, like of this film, you can review anything. Well, by that time, I was a desk assistant, or a glorified copy boy, to opinion and perspective news and review Sunday section, and the guys in there helped me, you know, turn my review into a real review instead of a term paper, you know.
So they worked with you on it to help shape it.
And one fellow in there edited everything I ever did before I turned it into Phil for the next 3 years. Because I was just, I'm back, I'm completed the circle. I was, in effect, a freelancer, a stringer for 3 years. And, you know, I know that the moment that I found that I got on staff 4 years to the day that I arrived. I started December 5th, 1961, and working temporary, the Cashword contest to learn a language record offered in the circulation department. And 4 years to the day, I got my promotion. And I mean, I did feel the lights all went on. I felt I was, you know, this was opportunity had knocked, and I was home, and all, you know. And my life did change, you know, just like that, it did.
As you started to do this work and became more experienced, what became your technique or approach to watching a film, recording your thoughts, and then translating those? What process did you develop?
First of all, they're people, and they want to be entertained. And I use entertain in the broadest sense, whether it's Shakespeare or Animal House or, you know,
sure,
whatever, you know. So you don't want to be so cerebral that you cut off the emotional response, because I feel over time I've decided that the emotional response is actually maybe more important than the cerebral response. But you learn sort of instinctively to also to be alert as to how things are being done. And I would scribble notes, which sometimes I couldn't even read afterwards, and I hardly ever used, but it was a psychological prop. But
in the dark.
Yeah, and I'll light 'em up pen, you know.
Okay.
And I'm an automatic writer at this point. Old pros like myself don't know the meaning of writer's blocks, really. You know, you grab an image, you say, okay, what's the big thing I took away from this? And you lead with that, and then that leads it. And the idea is to think about not only what is being evoked and its purpose or whatever, its meaning, but how the person, the filmmakers, went about doing it. I mean, especially if it's effective, what's working and why, and that's deserving of praise. And then, you know, if it's not working, why isn't it working? You know, I keep it really pretty simple, and that's really sort of the essence. I'm not big on big deal theories and things. I've found, you know, when structuralism came along some years ago, I thought, oh hell, you know, I've been at this racket long enough. I don't think I need to learn about what structuralism means for daily reviewing, you know. You want to give people enough information about why you feel the way you feel about the film, so that they can triangulate on you and make up their own minds. Well, this guy wasn't so crazy about this, but there's some things he mentioned as the kind of things that I might respond to, the reader, you know. And you don't editorialize, like you don't say, stay away from this piece of junk, you know. I mean, it should be clear that you think it's a piece of junk, you know. I really, 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 really believe that critics should be prepared to meet the movie halfway.
Mm-hmm.
The older you get, the more open you are, I find. And you don't prejudge genres and stuff like that. Well, it's this kind of movie, so it couldn't possibly be any good. I have a slogan which has become a cliche to me: is art is where you find it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to find it if you're not open to all this kind of stuff. And this goes for experimental films. You know, I mean, I've reviewed experimental films where, you know, they were composed of images hand painted onto the film, you know. Maybe an array of dots or completely abstract, but does it give you pleasure to watch these abstract movements and colors and stuff? Is it pleasurable or not, you know? So,
Well, you're known as a person who gives experimental film and unusual approaches a chance. And
well, I was able to do that a lot more before I retired, but I still get some very offbeat assignments.
right, I have to tell you, I struggle with experimental film because quite often I find it a little self-indulgent and repetitive.
Yes,
There
sure.
seems to be a tendency to do things over and over again, and I don't quite get it. I must be missing something.
Well,
on some of these.
sometimes I think the power of repetition is a little overrated. I have to be really honest in that now that I am officially retired, although, my God, I must write 60, 70, 80 reviews a year still instead of 300 or so. No. I'm not passionate about keeping up with experimental film.
Mm-hmm.
I was open to it. I wanted to support it. I thought it was, but the paper's not interested in that kind of stuff these days. And
Sure.
I'm finding one of the big discoveries you make in time is something I long suspected, is that sometimes the pictures that you want to see for pure enjoyment are quite different from the assignments you would like to get. I love somber, bleak, challenging films to write about because they're meaty and they're challenging. And I can honestly enjoy that whole process, and I know that there are readers out there who are going to appreciate those films. But right now, in my extra time, I'm trying to fill in a classic American cinema, and which I think is really underrated because, you know, it's so easy to see them as products of the dream factory, assembly line situations, and especially in retrospect, older pictures have different time, the passage of time. Time is always the ultimate critic, see. And the pictures that hold up, and this is not original with me, is the pictures that hold up are not necessarily the prestigious pictures of their day. You know, the things that got the Oscars in the 40s and 50s, the prestige directors and so on, like Zinnemann and Weiler, who certainly did some good work and they deserve to be respected. But I don't know that they scaled the heights the way some more maverick type of talents who may have had harder times, you know. I mean,
I'm always impressed.
I think about people like Sammy Fuller, who was a dear friend of mine, and I've been looking at Anthony Mann was so good. Jesus Christ, he was good. And Nicholas Ray and all these kind of sort of offbeat or somewhat rebellious type of guys, you know.
Yes.
that they got to some more, maybe more honest emotion. Although, geez, the Heiress, Wyler's Heiress is a pretty wonderful film, you know. I think the studio system was fabulous, but the whole system was too greedy. It was not, it didn't, I mean, that's why the independents had such a struggle when the studios owned, you know. Had they not been so greedy, if they had somehow accommodated the independents in a more generous way, maybe they wouldn't have lost their theaters, and they might have been in a better position to withstand the onslaught of TV. And the studios were, with few exceptions, were very short-sighted about TV.
Yes.
They didn't understand that, you know, it would take more. CinemaScope was not going to do it. That you might as well get into TV production and make a lot of money doing that to help support your film division, you know. Movies, art industry, but hyphenate. It's such a tension there.
Yes.
And on one level, creativity, that can be a very good discipline. It can keep very talented filmmakers from getting too arty or too much navel gazing, or, you know, it's not a bad thing to think about, well, who's going to see this movie, and why am I making it, and will people be able to enjoy it, and things like that. Those are not such wicked questions to be asking. But at the same time, the equation slips so much to where the bottom line and everything becomes too dominant, and then you get crappy pictures with crappy people and silly stuff. You know.
Well, to back up to something you said, I am always impressed on these lower budget films how hard people work and how much they try to do an artful job under
oh yes,
small
yes.
circumstances. It is consistently impressive.
My current editor understands my taste pretty well, and both foreign and indie stuff, really venturesome. Like a couple of weeks ago, I reviewed Lorna's Silence. It's absolutely one of the best pictures of the year. You know, it's just incredible.
Yes.
I love small, intimate films. I am bored with special effects and hardware movies and.
Yeah. You mentioned the critiquing or reviewing of bleak, austere films versus films that are more accessible and entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
Are Bergman and Tarkovsky examples of the more bleak perspective?
Oh, well, I would say particularly both of them. I reviewed a number of Bergmans, like Persona probably is the most important of the Bergmans. I did get to review every single Tarkovsky.
And what do you think?
I think he was a genius and tough, because many of them are, especially the later ones, are fairly surreal, like The Mirror, very, very personal. And you have to connect the dots yourself. And from the images and their flow and the structure, and then you have to, try to emotionally and intellectually make some kind of connection.
I found that very difficult, although I think I got there on The Sacrifice, his last film.
Oh, that's actually more accessible than several of its immediate predecessors. I think that's a profound film, really.
Well, and he was dying at the time of cancer as he made that film, which makes it all the more poignant, given the fact it deals with
He came to Telluride just at that time. And I sat next to him on the plane back to LA, and he didn't have a word of English. And I didn't know, I didn't say anything because I didn't know how to say. I wanted to say, look, I reviewed everything you've ever done and you are the greatest, but I didn't know how to, maybe he would have understood that, but I didn't, we were really tight, he was with his wife, really tight little plane, and I thought, oh God, I don't want to impose upon this person if he is not feeling well and he doesn't want to have some damn movie critic sitting next to him, so.
I find I struggle with his movies.
Oh,
to
they are.
connect them.
The Stalker.
But they're mesmerizing.
Mm-hmm.
You can't stop watching,
Oh,
even if you don't know where it's going.
Absolutely.
Going back in history, what about silent films? Do you enjoy silent films?
Oh my God, they're my favorite.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you like about them? What is it about silent film that grabs you?
Well, I love images. I suppose it has to do with my childhood in that if you have a parent who can't hear you very well, and then they therefore easily slip into the point of not listening, and then they're given to rages and stuff, you turn them off. You turn them off.
Makes sense.
And it's your only defense is to just turn it off somehow. And I have more confidence than images and in words. And I'm not a particularly good listener. Because you see, in self-defense in a situation as I was growing up, you don't listen in return. And then unfortunately, I have to make a real effort to listen to people. I mean, I had this conditioning,
Sure.
And you're so liberated with silent films. All you have to do is read the subtitles, you look at the images, and great direction like a Griffith or a Lubitsch or, King.
In your early career, did you meet some of the great silent directors?
Yes.
Who comes to mind as being?
Well, I had 3 remarkable close friendships, and they were with Fritz and George Cukor and Mae West. And they are very sustaining memories. And Fritz really was like a father to me. And of course, he was one of the most influential and greatest of silent era directors.
Yes.
And of course, he came here. He made as many pictures in Hollywood as he had in Germany before. Couldn't get Fritz to ever accept the possibility to any of his Hollywood films were on the level, because he had so many obstacles in making them, whereas he had in the 20s, he had a pretty much free hand at UFA. He was making...
UFA in Germany when he was making primarily silent films?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
His first talkie, which was maybe his most famous film, M, was in 1932 with Peter Lorre, the child murderer.
And then, of course, the great silent film, Metropolis, before that, which is a standard of film
but there are a whole
schools.
bunch of other ones he made in the 20s that are also important and fascinating and fun. And he was making the Siegfried, Siegfried and the Kriemhilde's Revenge for Eric Palmer, and it's this great operatic spectacle. And he said that he wanted a crowd scene, and he wanted 1,000 people, 2,000 people, and he went to Eric Palmer, who was a legendary producer. He later fled to Hollywood, and he said, oh, I would really love to have, 2,500. But he said, after all, we're not Hollywood. And Eric said, if you want 2,500, you shall have them. And Fritz was, now, that's my idea of producer. Now, he had nothing remotely like that. He had a pretty good relationship with Daryl Zanuck. And perversely, Hughes, he made a couple of pictures at RKO. And for some perverse reason, it seems that Howard Hughes tried to get him blacklisted or at least gray listed, and he was out of work for about a year. But he got a call from Harry Cohn to come over and have lunch with him at Columbia, like a 3-picture deal. And then he did make the 3 pictures at Columbia, and of course the big heat is really the famous one, and it was a big success.
Yes.
And one of his most important films, and certainly one of his 2 or 3 most important Hollywood films.
What sort of person was he? What was he like?
Fritz was a very imposing presence. He was, a writer once described him as a Roman ruin of a man, because he was, older, but he was, there was this nobility, and he was quite formidable, he had quite a reputation on the set of being really tough on people.
Yes.
And I gotta admit, I had seen him skewer a couple of people that I thought, oh my God, you don't really have to do that. One of the great privileges in my life was that I only got gentle, loving concern.
Kevin, tell us about George Cukor and your friendship with him.
I think that those of us who were privileged to have George Cukor's friendship think about him all the time. He was one of the great important people in my life, as he was for many other people. I would say that George mentored at least 3 generations of gay people in Hollywood. But that didn't say that he didn't encourage, help, and mentor lots of straight people, because he did that also. What was fascinating about George is that, God love him, he loved high society. He loved people with titles and old American aristocracy at the most exalted levels and stuff. And he loved the whole world of high society. But on another level, he was remarkably democratic. When he would have a group of his men friends for dinner, there were people of various levels in the industry or entertainment business, generally, not exclusively. But mainly people that he felt could hold their end up in a conversation. That was really, he was quite democratic, in that sense. And he really took an interest in his friends. He had legions of friends.
And a consistent entertainer. He was always having people over. And
Yes, yes.
I think he made it efficient for himself to have friends by having those kinds of parties and having them collected.
Yeah, no, I met him in '67. So I knew him 16 years, I think it was. And I think he had begun to slow down on the big entertainment. Oh, I remember he had one fabulous luncheon that he invited me to. And, but I think the famous Sunday afternoon by the pool things had kind of slowed down a little bit. But I mean, he just did not care to dine alone, and he had, thankfully, he had dear friends over for dinner the last night of his life, you know. And that last year, he sort of took the habit of after dinner taking a little nap, maybe 20 minutes or so, and then the rest of us would sit, and then he'd come back in and he'd be all refreshed and everything. Well, I wasn't there that night, but Tucker Fleming, a wonderful man who was a neighbor of his, and Tucker was, and you know, this time he had a heart attack.
Yes.
That was it, you know.
Well, what a wonderful opportunity. George was gay, but kept it pretty quiet. Didn't he, for most part?
There's one word that sums it all up. People who never knew him and people who weren't around and people who don't know what they're talking about, it's such it's so wrong to write him off as closeted. Technically, George was not really ever closeted. He was just, to use a timeless phrase, discreet.
And it was pretty well known,
Oh, it was
wasn't it?
completely known.
Just about by everyone.
Oh, by everyone, yes.
How about yourself at that point? You were a newspaper man, a reviewer. Were you open, or were you discreet as well?
I would say discreet would be a long time, but of course it evolved.
Mm-hmm.
And by the late 80s, GLAAD had asked for a meeting with management because GLAAD was pretty new organization at that time, and they felt that the quality of covering gay issues, you know, for many years, the stories that you would get in the Times or any mainstream people, there were two kinds. Vice raised, you know, bar busts.
Yes.
From the Vice Squad, entrapment stories, or a coverage of gay pride parades was always featuring drag queens or
Sure.
dykes on bikes. God love them all, you know. So the things were beginning to crack a little bit. And then I had a colleague in Calendar, who was an editor, David Fox, a wonderful fellow. He thought to himself, you know, the gay people in editorial ought to know each other. And I told him, I said, why don't you invite me, for God's sake? But anyway, he didn't the first time around. Mm-hmm. He invited 3 or 4 people to his apartment to his condo over on Rossmore to have a little gathering to discuss all of this. And then the next meeting we had was a different place. And we found ourselves automatically drafting, and there are like, 18 of us or so, a petition to the publisher for job protection. And there was a fellow in business section who was very, very smart, and he became a leading voice. And we were, you know, here you had 18 writers and editors all trying to come up with a couple of sentences, you know. But Harry was really good. He says, look, we don't want to start confrontationally. He said, oh, we just assume that it's an oversight that gay people are not included in the job protection policy, that protects other minorities, women, people, or discrimination on race or religion.
Mm-hmm.
And we're bringing this to your attention and hope it can be corrected. That was really low key. Not
And what year was this, Kevin, that this was taking place?
This was about 1989 or so, about 20
Okay.
years ago.
Very good.
Right after the GLAAD thing, things were just, things were beginning to open up. Big, people coming out were beginning to
Sure.
becoming much more widespread. It took about 3 months for the legal department to vet all this, but we were lucky with the publisher at the time. He had come from Newsday, Laventhal, and he was Jewish from New York, probably liberal, and about 3 months later, there was this big thing plopped on everybody's desk. And it was all very legalese, but it was extremely emphatic that there was to be no discrimination against gay people, discrimination against ethnicity or race or religion or anything, and that if anybody experienced any of that they were to come to him personally. Was very forceful. But he used the term reaffirm, which was extremely clever. Now, some of my more militant colleagues were offended by that because it's reaffirm, we're the ones who got him to do it. It wasn't existent. But I thought it was kind of a stroke of genius that he would say reaffirm and sort of suggest that it really had been all in place all along, and that this had a tradition behind
Sure.
it. And I wasn't offended. I thought I was too impressed by its cleverness.
It's a little clever, isn't it?
Yes, it was.
What was gay life like in LA before that, during the 60s and 70s and 80s?
Well, I hardly know, because I was one of those people who was a workaholic.
Okay.
And as you can tell, I never was a gym rat. And on the one hand, this prospect of going to a bathhouse or a bar was not attractive to me.
Yes.
Either of those things. So, I really was pretty isolated,
But you were one of the first, I think, to review gay cinema.
That's true. I always felt that I should use my position to, not give gay filmmakers a free pass, but, evaluate them as to whether I thought they were any good or not. I have to admit I'm only human. I think there have been some times when I was a little too gentle on one or two occasions. I always felt that this was something I could do. And I sought out gay cinema and stuff. I had an interesting thing happen a couple of months ago. Outfest decided to have Outfest and several other organizations that had to do like a week-long celebration of the Pat Rocco and his pioneering work. Now, Pat's lived in Hawaii for 1 million years, and I hadn't seen him like in 40 years or so. And he started showing very extremely soft-core gay films at the old Park Theater in Westlake Park, off of Westlake Park.
Yes.
And I reviewed them, and fairly favorably, And several organizations had some showings and some celebrations for him a couple of months ago, And then there was this big tribute at the Egyptian that the Cinematheque put on, and they had a whole potpourri of his films that evening. And I went, and there was a little reception behind, and I went up to him, and I said, "Pat, I'm Kevin Thomas." He said, "Oh my God, you know." And the manager of the Park Theater was there, and he asked the both of us to come up and be introduced to the audience, come down to the front of the theater where he was speaking, you
Yes.
know, which was, and what I didn't know at the time is that apparently Pat really was creating history, that his little vignettes would show handsome young guys who were attracted to each other, and they would take off their clothes and they might embrace and they might kiss, and that, I mean, there was no sex. You know, it was not even suggestion. It was just very, very, very gentle and
Sure.
restrained. But, you know, still 40 years ago, that was pretty daring, you know, for in gay cinema. And I mean, I can't verify this or anything, but it was said in the course of this evening that not only had that not ever been done in LA before, that much I assumed, that it may have been even in the world, you know, that this kind of thing in a commercial such advertised in the paper, you know, in a neighborhood theater.
A real movie.
Yeah. And I think finally, the police busted them finally, but they didn't have a case, you know. And then he moved on to other projects and moved to Hawaii and music and stuff like that. But I didn't realize that I was helping create some history when reporting about the...
Well, you did, and you probably gave a voice to it a decade before it became much more common.
The founder of the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association, a wonderful man, passed away a couple of years ago. He was Washington correspondent, I mean, LA correspondent for the Washington Post.
Okay.
He had an office near me. And one of the last things he did before he got really terminally ill was he insisted I would get a Lifetime Achievement Award, the only one given after Randy Schultz,
Sure.
which I thought was a tremendous honor. Because he said, you know, he was there like in the early 70s, and he said, "My God, Kevin, you know, I didn't understand that he was even gay, you know." And they were going to be having the NLGGA convention in LA that year. This was in 2003, I think. And he said, "I want you to have the Lifetime Achievement Award." And he said, back there in those 70s, he says, "I couldn't believe what you were saying about gay in the pages of the LA Times." I have to say, for the paper, they never raised, well, I can't say that maybe once they raised an eyebrow, but they
That's
never,
not bad.
They
though.
never,
Well, and you were doing
censored
something
me.
that really was groundbreaking and very historic. And as you look back upon gay cinema, are there a few films that really resonated with you?
Well,
genre?
yeah, sure. Parting Glances was really important.
Yes.
I didn't get to review it.
Did you like The Boys in the Band? Did you think that was an important film of that time?
Yes. Yeah. Universal asked me if I couldn't use my good offices to get me to come to the premiere. I don't think I went there. But yeah, I'd like, it's probably dated today, but that's a good thing to be able to say.
Well, it's a time capsule of
It's
that.
a time
of that- of
capsule.
that era.
I don't, to me, dated is not a dirty word, you know.
Right.
Yeah, it had a tremendous impact on me, of course.
I'm going to segue to a gay director out of the blue who you are very knowledgeable, and that's Visconti.
I reviewed all his films.
And what do you draw from Visconti? I'm a big fan.
Oh, I'm a
of his,
huge
and
fan.
I have seen pretty much all of them, not all.
The great thing about Visconti and about George Cukor is they had the kinds of careers and the generation that they were in that they didn't get to do, quote, gay films, you know. But what was interesting about what's valuable is I think that both of them, in their different ways, are able to show that the breadth and depth of a gay sensibility, that it is not restricted to just gay people or gay issues or gay
Sure.
sex. You know, I mean, both of them had a very profound grasp of human nature and
Yes.
motivations and stuff.
And of heterosexual relationships and
Yes.
the complexities of those.
Yes, and I wonder whether there's ever been any director more understanding of women, you know,
It's right up there.
than Cukor.
Well, he's generally considered to be the best in history. I read an interview where he was accused of being a woman's director, and he did, bristle at it a little bit, and then, as you have, talked about the various men that he dealt with, that he was very close to and directed well and good performances. And then he sort of circled back and said, well, yet I really enjoyed working with the women, and I was a bit closer to them. And so he kind of acknowledged
Well, I
that
just
there
read
was something.
somewhere, somebody made an astute remark, is that, first of all, George loved the theater. He came from the theater. He loved theatricality.
That's why they gave him a chance to direct in the beginning, because
Yes.
talkies were just starting.
Yes, and he was dialogue director.
And he was viewed as a sophisticate.
Yes, he was dialogue director on All Quiet on the Western Front when they started out as a silent,
that's
and they
true.
realized they had to convert it into a talkie. And maybe one reason why he was so sympathetic to women is that he, on some primal level, understood that their roles in life, in the times that he lived in and the kinds of stories he told, had to maybe do a certain amount of acting in their real life to get along with in a male-dominated society, you know.
Well, you have seen so much and have commented on so much. One of the things that you've done, in addition to being one of the first people to, maybe the first one, to bring gay cinema front and center and have it looked at critically, is you've been very kind to undiscovered treasures and young directors. I know at least two directors that we work with, Ron Oliver and Dave Dakota, who believe they would not have the career they have without your commentary
Oh my God,
on what
that's
they're doing.
nice
They
to
both
hear.
they both made that point loud and clear, and Ron in particular, who's very articulate, said it saved me. He says I was ready to slit my wrists after the Canadian reviews of one of my pictures, and
Which
then
picture
Kevin.
was it?
Well, it was what Ron would say is a silly film called Prom Night 2.
Probably too.
And you called it the Blue Velvet of high school horror movies, and saved his career, he says. And since then, Ron has gone on to make probably 40 films.
Oh my God, I never knew any of this. That's wonderful to
And
know. That's
he
psychic income.
it is the only review he has ever kept and framed. He has it in his house in Palm Springs because it was so important to him.
Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger has my review of Conan the Barbarian framed on his wall.
I guess
The funny thing is that when I reviewed it, Maria and Bobby Schreiber were my next door neighbors.
Well, it's funny the way life works sometimes. Mae West, could you talk about her a bit?
Oh, sure. I love May dearly, and I was honored to be asked to write the eulogy for her services. And the great thing was that she was everything that you would hope that she would be. She was full of fun. She was strong and tough-minded, but caring and a paradox. She wanted the world to see her as Diamond Lil, the shady lady who lived only for pleasure. But actually, she was one of the hardest working people in the history of show business. In her private life, she was amazingly generous with people down on their luck. She was thoughtful when she played a town, and she toured, you know, so much of her life. And it had a success, which was most often the case. She would just pick any church and leave an anonymous donation. She felt that if she'd had a success in a community, that she ought to give back in that way.
Kevin, you have been so instrumental in the careers of young filmmakers. What sorts of thoughts or advice would you give to young people who are interested in either pursuing your direction, which is to write about film, or people who are interested in the film business in general in other capacities? What would you say to them?
Well, I think it's a two-part question. Very quickly, you know, there are all kinds of opportunities always in the film businesses. It's the toughest on earth. You know that better than I. But I mean, still, there are different media and stuff like that, different formats, and all kinds of ways to enter. And if you have the drive and you have the talent, I certainly encourage that. Now, when you come to journalism, that's a different thing. I think any old ink-stained wretch such as myself is not going to be too encouraging to any young person to think of a career at a big city daily print journalism.
Sure.
That if you absolutely feel that you must be a film critic or write about film appreciation or something like that, which is in a way, certainly in the print area, a dying profession. I think you absolutely have to think electronically, you know.
Sure.
And how people do that or get into that, I really haven't a clue because I haven't had to go there, and so I don't know. But I think, and certainly young people I know who are doing film criticism and any media are generally have day jobs, like a lot of struggling actors. That the chances of people having a full-time, long-time career on a major print publication is just getting tougher and tougher by the minute.
It's not the way the world is going.
No,
right now.
and they really have to think in terms of alternative medias of expression.
But we're beginning to see a lot of that, and a lot of people are trying their hand at it. Kevin, thank you very much for taking this time.
Oh my God, thank you for, you know, I've never had an interview like this in my life.
Good.
Never, you know.